Way back in the early 1990s, before the internet completely changed how we connect, a small group of people in Japan got together over a shared and kind of secret skill. They called themselves the Stereo Otaku, and from their own living rooms, they would end up kicking off a nationwide phenomenon completely by accident. So today, we're going to get into the little-known story of how they did it, and maybe more importantly, why they did it.
So what if I told you there was a club so exclusive that money couldn't buy you a spot, and it didn't matter who you knew? The only, and I mean only, way to get in was to unlock a hidden feature inside your own brain. And no, this wasn't some hypothetical idea. It was the real-life premise for a society that met for the very first time in Tokyo.
So they called themselves the Stereo Otaku Gakai, which basically translates to the Stereo Nerd Society. And their one and only rule for joining, you had to be able to do what's called naked eye stereoscopy. Now what that means is you have the skill to look at two images side by side and then get your brain to fuse them into a single 3D image, all without any glasses or special gadgets. It's a neat perceptual trick, and for this group, it was absolutely everything.
And listen, their first meeting on May 31st, 1991 was no casual get-together. We're talking about a 10-hour marathon. 15 people, most of whom had found each other through these really niche art scenes and super early online message boards, finally had a room where they could just let their obsession out. One member even tells this great story about a woman who was so desperate for her husband to join her that she gave him a crash course on how to do it on the morning of the meeting.
And the stuff they brought to show off, it was something else. They had homemade 3D photos, of course, but also these amazing stereo animations somebody made on an old Amiga computer. One member even screened a stereo nude clip from an adult video he'd actually directed. Yeah, you heard that right. They watched videos that used motion to create a 3D illusion, and at one point, all 15 of them are just standing there, in front of this huge photo of a meteor, all crossing their eyes at the same time to make it pop. This was definitely not your average hobby club. So, you might be asking, what was the big deal? What was driving all this intense dedication? Well, it wasn't just about a cool visual trick. For the Stereo Otaku, this was a seriously philosophical mission. It was all about creating what they called a brain resort. Basically, a private vacation spot right inside your own head. You see, as one of the members, Yoshimaru Shin, pointed out, the entire history of 3D, ever since it was invented back in the 1840s, was tied to a device. You needed a viewer, a tool to make it happen. The Stereo Otaku Gakai, they were all about making a radical break from that long tradition. And this really boils down to two totally different ways of thinking. The conventional Western way saw doing it with your naked eyes as a kind of last resort, something you did when you didn't have the right equipment. But for the otaku, oh no. For them, it was the entire point. The fun wasn't just seeing the 3D image. The pleasure was in the skill of actively creating it with your own mind.
And this is where we get to their core idea, this beautiful concept they called the brain resort, or nonai risotto. The thinking was, if you mastered the skill, you could turn inward and build this private world of pure perceptual joy. You could stare at repeating patterns on wallpaper or look at these specially made images and just escape into a 3D space that existed only inside your head. It's like a mental vacation you can take anytime, anywhere. One member, Takasugi Don, put it so perfectly. He said that for a decade, he'd just been collecting and looking at these stereo photo books all by himself, thinking he was just some fool with a weird hobby. But later, he realized he wasn't wasting his time. He was unknowingly building his very own brain resort. Finding the society gave him a name, and more importantly, a community, for this intensely personal thing he'd been doing all along. Okay, so you have this group that's all about this super internal private experience, right? Well, what happened next is something nobody could have predicted. This secret little club was about to accidentally light the fuse on a massive, nationwide 3D boom. So here's how it all went down. Things moved fast. You go from their first meeting in '91 to just a year later, they're holding a public exhibition, and then boom. In late 1992, a book edited by one of the members called CG Stereogram gets published. By 1993, because of that one book, those magic eye-style pictures were a full-blown craze all over Japan.
See, there is this unwritten rule in Japanese publishing, a golden rule, really. Stereo books just don't sell. Well, CG Stereogram, which was packed with the kind of computer-generated images the otaku had been obsessed with, didn't just break that rule. It absolutely shattered it. It became a bestseller and was the spark that lit the whole fire.
And we actually have the receipts for this, literally.
thanks to member Tanaka Shihiro, who actually went out and tracked sales at camera stores. Before this boom, a store might sell maybe 1 or 2 of these specialty stereo cameras a month. After the book hit, that average doubled. The otaku's very specific passion was now driving a real commercial market.
And get this, the members themselves, they didn't just start the fire, they fanned the flames. In just over a year, from late 92 to early 94, members of this tiny club were involved in writing or creating 10 different books on the subject. 10! They went from being this hidden little subculture to being the top experts in a national trend.
So what happens when the craze starts to die down, when the public moves on to the next thing? Well, the group's founder, Oda Yoshitaka, had this really great way of putting it. He said they had shed their temporary disguise. They weren't hiding anymore. And even if the public's fever broke, theirs wouldn't. Their passion wasn't a fad. It was their baseline. Their normal temperature, as he said, was just hotter than everyone else's. But here's the thing to remember. For them, the boom was never really the point. Their real legacy isn't about how many books they sold. It's in the amazing and kind of weird questions they started asking. They left behind this incredible legacy of pure curiosity.
So one of the members, Tokuyama Masaki, made this brilliant comparison. He said, look, mathematics gets better by tackling these huge unsolved problems, right? Why can't we do the same for stereo vision? And so he and the rest of the group got together and actually compiled a list of challenges for the future.
And you have to hear the list they came up with. It's like a to-do list for reality itself. It goes from the scientific to the poetic to the straight-up paranormal, like how do you photograph a rainbow in 3D, especially when it moves every time you move? How could you possibly capture the aura of a martial arts kick? Or a ghost? Or what about making one of those MC Escher impossible objects feel totally real through 3D? This is where you see their passion, this joyful, wild pursuit of the impossible.
But underneath all of these fun challenges was their one true, massive, unsolved mystery. A question that's less about technology and more about, well, us. Why? Why are we, as people, so driven to see and capture our world in depth? Why does that third dimension fascinate us so much?
And that really leaves us with a final thought. What this stereo otaku gakkai really did was find a whole new universe just by learning how to look at things a little differently. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What kind of unseen worlds, what hidden brain resorts are just waiting for you if you only knew how to shift your own perspective?